Welcome to the Painting Coach, where today we are painting some of the brand new Hernkyn Yaegir from the new Kill Team Termination box. A huge thanks to Games Workshop for sending it out to me ahead of release so I can create this content. Now, before we start, two things. Firstly, we're painting the Ymir conglomerate. Ymir, Ymir, I don't know how you say it. And the reason we're doing this is because I put a poll out to my Instagram followers and that's what they chose. And secondly, we're going to be painting the entirety of this model with a size 5 Artist Opus Series S brush. And that's because Byron from Artist Opus said my brushes were too small. So, without any further ado, let's get painting. So, we're going to paint the leader for these Jaegers, and I primed in black using Colourforge Matte Black Primer. And here you see the weapon of choice for the day, the size 5 Artist Opus Series S brush, which Artist Opus did very kindly send me. It's a chunky boy. Let's get going then. So the first thing we're going to do is paint the armour. Now, there's not a huge amount of armour on these particular models, and we're going to use Khorne Red to get that based. We'll then move on to the pressure suit, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Dark Reaper. So we're going to do all the base coating first, and then we're going to shade it all at the same time, just to save us a little bit of time later on. Now, this is a little bit thinner, so you will need 2 coats to get a nice even coverage. So far, so good with the chunky size 5. I'm going to base the inside of the cloak next, and the colour I'm going to use for that is Steel Legion Drab. And a big shout out to one of my patrons here, DJ. I know that you love a Steel Legion Drab rim of a base, but I'm not going to do that on this model. I'm just going to use it on the inside of the cloak. Then I'll do the outside of the cloak, and I want this to be a darker brown, so the colour I'm going to use is Dryad Bark. Finally, I'll paint all of the silver, and the colour I'm using for this is Dark Aluminium from Vallejo. Now, you can use whatever colour silver you've got. If you've got lead belcher, that's fine. So coat silver from 2 thin coats is fine as well. This goes on quite nicely. It covers really well. And I've got to say, so far, actually, the base coat is going quite quickly using this slightly chunkier brush than I would normally do. With that done, it's time to shade all of these base coats. Now, I'm not going to use Nuln Oil. I'm going to use the new Dark Tone from the Army Painter Fanatic because I think it gives you a better result than Nuln Oil. If you've only got Nuln Oil, absolutely feel free to use it. But if you've got the new formulation, you're going to need to use 2 coats. I'm going to focus on everything apart from the inside of the cloak. So everything I paint in Steel Legion Drab, I'm going to leave for now. When that dark tone is completely dry, I'm then going to use Strong Tone, which is the Agrax Earthshade equivalent. And I'm going to paint this all over the Steel Legion Drab section. So again, making sure it's not too heavy and settling and pooling too much in the recesses. We just want to give it a nice shade. Whilst that's drying, I'm then going to go in with some Abaddon Black and just paint in all of the bits that are going to be black leather and black rubber. So we've got a lot of things like holster, belt, backpacks, and we've also got the weapon. So we'll paint that with the Abaddon Black as well. And we've also got things like the knee pads on the pressure suit and the boots, which are going to be a black rubber. So we want that Abaddon Black base on them too. The first thing we'll do is highlight all of the silver, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Chrome from Vallejo Model Air. You can use whatever bright silver you've got. Now, this is going to be a fairly straightforward step. All I'm going to do is drag my brush along the sharp edges and get some nice crisp highlights. So essentially, anything you've painted silver, drag your brush along and get that nice crisp light. Next up, we'll highlight all of the black rubber parts. So like I said, the knee pads and the feet or the boots. The first colour we're going to use is going to be Eshin Grey, which is a very dark grey. Now, this doesn't cover fantastically well, but it is going to give us the effect we're looking for. All we need to do is just pull it across any defined edges to get a nice crisp highlight. And where we can't do that, we just want to be careful. We'll finish that highlight on all of the rubber areas using some Dawnstone. Now, this is, again, a fairly straightforward step, but the Dawnstone is quite bright, so it can be quite overpowering. So take your time with this and make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. You can see I've got a very tiny bit on the tip of this size 5. And again, if you do make any mistakes, you can always go back in and tidy it up with the previous colours that you've used. Moving on to the undersuit or the underclothes, we're going to use Dark Reaper again. And I'm also going to use this to highlight the rest of the black, so all of the black we haven't touched yet. When it comes to the undersuit, there's not a huge amount to cover because it's all quite in shadow. So just be careful around the silver you already finished. And then when it comes to things like the leather and the casing on the weapon, all we want to do is drag the brush along those edges to get those nice crisp highlights. If you go a little bit chunky at this stage, don't worry because we're going to keep refining it. We'll carry on highlighting that pressure suit and the leather using Thunderhawk Blue. Now, the main thing that we want to do with this colour is make sure we paint it inside of the Dark Reaper from the previous stage. This means that we need to make sure we've got a really good tip on our brush. And I've got to say, I'm really impressed with the tip on this particular brush. Like I said, it's a size 5, so it's very chunky, but it's got a very, very fine tip. And that's enabling me to get some really fine detail on as I work across the leather. The last highlight we'll do is with some Fenrisian Grey. Now, I'm not using very much paint at all here, and I'm not highlighting all of the areas. What I'm looking for are perhaps places where the leather has scuffed, and also sharp edges where it's going to be particularly angular. We're going to just dot and dab some of the Fenrisian Grey along here, and that's going to give us a very nice crisp highlight. Next up, we'll highlight the inside of the cloak, and we're going back to Steel Legion Drab. So again, just be careful around areas you've already finished. We're just looking to target those parts of the model that are going to catch the most light, and this is going to be a fairly chunky highlight. We'll refine that in the next step using some Baneblade Brown. Now, this is a very thin paint, so it's going to take maybe 2 coats to get a decent highlight. Just don't put it on too thickly and try not to rush this stage. We'll finish up the highlight of the coat lining using some Karak Stone. And you'll also notice I've painted the bedroll on the backpack this colour as well, just to give it a little bit of differentiation and help it stand out. And again, this is going to be a very crisp highlight. You can see I've got very little paint on my brush. We'll highlight the outside of the cloak next, so going back to that Dryad Bark. Now, I've not got a lot of paint on my brush, but I have got quite a damp brush, and this means I'm going to spread it around a little bit, and as it dries, it's going to blend into the colour underneath, and that's because there's some nice folds on this cloak, and I don't want the highlight to be too harsh. So just work your way around doing this. Where you've got some really crisp folds, such as on the arms and the sleeves, then make sure you certainly do go in and put a nice crisp highlight in there. Next up, we'll take some Gorthor Brown. Now, one of the key things we're going to do with this is highlight inside of the Dryad Bark from the last stage. But again, making sure that if we need to, we just take some Dryad Bark and feather it out so that it's not too harsh. We're also going to highlight all of the piping around the cloak. And this is going to help it stand out like you see on the box art. And this is a really easy step. You just drag your brush along it and get that nice crisp highlight. For a final highlight, we'll take a little bit of Zamesi Desert. And we're going to just do this in more of a dotting and dabbing, kind of jagged highlight, so it looks like just the cloak is quite worn, rather than a nice, crisp, clean, pristine highlight. So again, all you need to do is get a little bit on your brush and just tap it along things like the piping on the cloak, and also where we've got those nice, really crisp and pronounced folds, we'll pop it on there as well. To highlight the red, we're going to go back to Khorne Red. And we're going to paint this over the majority of the red, leaving the darker colours in the recesses, but also considering where light's going to fall. So if light is going directly above, then we're going to paint all of those parts, but we're going to make sure the paint is fairly thin. And again, you can see I've not got a huge amount on my brush. I'm then going to take some Evil Sunz Scarlet and start to block in some of the highlights. Now, I'm being sympathetic to the colour underneath and leaving a little bit of that showing so that this highlight isn't a traditional line highlight. It's more of an area highlight, so we consider how light reflects a little bit. That's how we're going to do this stage. Now, I've got a little bit more paint on my brush here, purely down to the fact I had to thin this down quite a bit because it's very warm in the UK, believe it or not, and my Evil Sunz Scarlet is quite old and it's got quite thick. So that's why I've got a little bit more in my brush. I'm then going to mix a tiny bit of bold titanium white from Procreal into that Evil Sunz Scarlet. Now, this is going to give you a nice pink colour. So no, I haven't gone mad. I'm just going to use this very sparingly on the most angular parts that catch the most light. And that's going to give me a little bit of desaturation on the red, whilst also giving me a nice reflective highlight. And do this fairly sparingly, because you may need to go back in and take some of it away if you do too much, because we want the armour to still read as red. We just want a nice sharp light. We don't want it to turn pink. While I've got the white on the palette, I'm going to paint all of the bulbs, such as the light that the Votan have got in the front of their chest, and also any other screens, such as this guy's got on his sleeves. I'm also going to paint the blade of his weapon, and just to make it stand out, I'm going to paint his cloak as well. So this is going to take 2 or 3 coats of white on the blade and the cloak. So just take your time, and this is also the time where I'm regretting attaching that back. So to give that fur a nice frozen world look, I'm just going to take some Pylar Glacier contrast paint and paint it all over this. Now, just be very careful. It's a fairly weak paint, but going over white, it does stand out. So we don't want to spill this onto any of the bits we've already finished. We'll do that blade next. I want this to look like a frost blade as well to help it stand out. So I'm going to take some Frost Hard contrast paint. And all I'm going to do very simply is paint it all over the blade. I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm then going to wipe away most of the contrast paint, focusing on the middle of the blade. Now, I'm using a fairly big brush here. It's a size 5. Remember, I've spoken about it quite a lot in this video, and that's going to really help take away quite a lot of contrast paint. And then what you're left with is a very nice gradient on the blade that's literally taken seconds to do. It's not the most refined gradient, but it just gives that impression that it's a nice ice blade. To paint all the screens and the light in the chest, I just use different colour contrast paints. You can use whatever colour you want. So I'm using Imperial Fist for the yellow, I'm using Striking Scorpion for the green, and Baal Red, well, for the red. It's nice, easy and straightforward. To paint the inside of the cloak, I'm taking some Guilliman Flesh contrast paint, and this is just to give the impression of the animal hide that's on there. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can use the Pylar Glacier, but I just thought this would give it a nice bit of differentiation. It's done. It's finished. I'm really, really happy with how it's come out. It painted entirely with a size 5 brush. It just goes to show it's all about the tip. So Byron, you were absolutely spot on. A huge thank you for sending me that size 5 to experiment on this model. I really hope you like how it's turned out. I'm really chuffed with it. If you want to know how I painted the head, then check out this video here. I used exactly the same technique as the Space Marine painted video. So thank you so much for watching. Make sure you do check out the other content and leave a like and a comment down below if you enjoyed the video. I'll catch you next time.